Road to Rouen was first announced for like, you know, next weekend, which we're totally not having now because of the plague. But it's still planning to go ahead next summer. So I thought I'd go ahead and teach it. It's a very introductory class. I just kind of go through the very like the basic stuff, like how to like, and we can talk about how to take like other time period kits and bring them more to look like they're 14th century too, because there's ways to do that. First page picture is a range of 14th century styles and countries, like English on the left and Italian on the right with myself and my husband. And how do I, there we go. So the most helpful thing that I find when developing a persona or deciding on how to make clothes for an event or something like that is I go through the who, where, when. And I actually have this a little bit flipped. So we're actually gonna start on the right-hand side. A lot of times I'll start with like a social class. Who am I trying to portray? Am I portraying a servant, a craftsperson? Am I portraying a merchant or somebody from the nobility? Once I start with that, you know, we're in this time period, maybe possibly greater time period. In the 14th century, we're talking about a century. I divide it kind of into thirds. And that seems to work pretty well. Where in that time period are we talking about? I believe for Road to Rouen, they were asking for people to focus between 1350 and 1380. So that's kind of mid to late. Personally, my primary persona, I do 1380 to 1400. So I'm having to like back off of my clothing a little bit, and I had to like sort of readjust what clothing I was going to be wearing for this based on that. And then finally, if you decide on like a country, because even when we talk about something very early period, like Norse, the other super popular one, depending on the country is going to depend on variations in style. So the British Isles kind of have their own little style. France has its own style. Germany shares some style stuff with France. But then Italy and Spain are kind of their own things, especially at the beginning of the century. They're very, very different style-wise. So you want to think about like, where in Europe is your persona from? And then that leads us into the what. What are you going to be wearing? Well, typically, you're going to more or less follow like one of these charts. So you'll have, everybody's going to have an underlayer. So for the men, it's going to be a shirt and a pair of braids. For women, it's going to be the shift. And those are going to be made out of linen. All of Europe, except for Italy, all evidence for underclothing is linen. In Italy, because they had so much trade with the southern portion of the Mediterranean, they had some rough cotton that was brought in and then woven it with rough linen to produce underclothing for the lowest classes. So it was apparently super cheap. But that is the only, that's really the only evidence for cotton fiber being used in clothing. You find cotton fiber in other things like the batting inside of padded coats and things like that, but you don't find a lot of it woven into fabric. So that's your linen layer, that's your underwear layer. Then you're gonna have hosen. Both men and women would have worn hosen. Now we don't have a lot of evidence for just how tall women's hosen were. Did they always stop at the knee, or did some women wear ones that came all the way up to their waist? Because it's pretty cold in some of the northern portions of Europe in the wintertime, and I'll be honest, I'd probably wear like a full-length hosen if I could. Joined hosens do start appearing in the very late 14th century. Prior to that, it's always split hosen for men. And in the early part of the century, the hosen kind of come up to about mid-thigh and then have a really long string that hooks up to the waist. As you get further into towards the end of the century, the hosen fit more to the calf and go further up the thigh. If you have larger, more muscular thighs, the fitting on that can get a little bit more tricky, but it's absolutely worth it to go through the effort of trying to get that fitting done, finding someone that can help you with the fitting, because they will be significantly more comfortable to wear. Over that, you're gonna have your base level garment. And depending on the social class of your persona, that base level garment might be most of what you wear. I'm being warned that my internet connection is unstable by my computer. So hopefully things do not get, hopefully if I go away, I'll get back on, I promise. So you're gonna have your coterie layer. So I'm gonna stand up because I'm wearing a base level my base layer coterie. And I'm gonna have to tilt this back a little bit. There we go. So this is my base layer coterie. I have rolled up the sleeves because I'm dressed in my working class outfit at the moment. So it's fitted, it holds me in, it sort of presses everything down. But at the same time, I have a pretty good range of motion in this one that I don't have in my upper class base gown. That one, I can kind of do this. In that one, the range of motion is not as good. Now, if it was very cold outside, or I was a more upper class person and didn't need to worry about tripping over dresses or getting sleeves into water or sleeves in the way, I would probably have an overgown over this. And men had overgowns over their coats as well. Now, there's a lot of different accessories that you can add to an outfit that sort of finish the look. Actually wondering, a lot more people signed on since I started talking. And so you have your accessories that are gonna finish your look. So right now I have a linen veil that's wrapped around my head and just wrapped around itself to kind of cover my hair. This serves a couple of purposes. One is it keeps my hair clean, and also I don't have to style my hair every single day when I wear this. So very dusty, hot events like Gulf Wars, Penzig, something like that, where you're walking around all day, there's dirty roads, they don't know if it hasn't rained recently or they haven't watered the roads, there's a lot of dust in the air. And that dust just like clings to your hair as you walk around all day. If you cover your hair with linen like this, it actually stays quite clean. And the linen doesn't retain heat to the same extent that, say, a silk veil or a wool veil would. And it helps your head to breathe a little bit. And so I can do this for most of a day at Penzig, but I can't do like the wool hats and things like that. And I really like having this at Penzig because then I don't feel like I have to wash my hair every day, which my hair really hates that. So avoiding the washing the hair every day. Couple of other things with the garment you may have noticed that my neckline is actually quite high on this dress. So one of the sort of modern visual perceptions that we put into wearing medieval clothing is that we'll bring the necklines down a little bit lower so that we have cleavage. Because, you know, everybody likes to show off a little bit. And the mistake that we make there, and I made this mistake when I was first making coat RDs myself, is that we're accustomed to our cleavage sitting lower than it actually does with a properly fitted coat RD. The properly fitted coat RD, your cleavage actually comes up a little bit higher. And with my upper class gown, it pushes them up to here. I'm not kidding. And so my neckline is not any lower. It might be an inch lower on my upper class gown, but I have a lot of cleavage across the top because it's visible from the top, not from the front. And that's sort of a mistake that we sometimes make just as reinterpreters, as historians. Like it's one of those modern eye meets the medieval world, and then you have to remember to interpret for that. So that's a simple thing you can do with your coat RDs to try and like sort of take them to that next level where you're like, something quite looks a little off. Oh, like this will make it look a little bit more like the images. That's what I found. Adding simple headgear, linen veil. Also, there it is. I have this is my guest bedroom, so I have like a row of like stuff to show off for the class. St. Brigida's cap, and I do colored embroidery down the back of mine, but a St. Brigida cap to cover your hair if you don't want to do the wrapped veil. If it's really, really hot, I'll do this instead of the wrapped veil because it's a little bit less material on the top of my head. Your bicocket hat. This is my husband, so this will actually like go over his veil, kind of hilariously. It's a little bent. Needs some help, but got a bicocket hat. Hoods. Getting the hood in the correct shape will make a difference in whether or not your hood looks like a Norse hood or a 12th century hood, or if it looks like it belongs in the 14th century. Couple of things to do is to bring the face forward. So there's this little bit of a curve here at the front edge. You can see here. And then you can turn back the edge of the hood. Putting buttons down the front or just having it open will also give it a little bit more of a 14th century feel. And then this is really dark image. Making sure that this is a curved line instead of coming down to a point will also make the hood look more 14th century versus other time periods. And the last bit is make sure you put a lyre pipe on it. Mine's quite long, but definitely as a part of 14th century fashion, 14th century styling, you see that lyre pipe so often, even on lower class folks. Something else to remember in the 14th century is that second and third hand clothing trade was huge. At one point, London had just hundreds of secondhand clothing stores in the 14th century and going forward, because it was often less expensive for somebody to go buy clothing that had been made for, a merchant's wife 4 years ago, and she was tired of wearing it. So she gave it to her maid, and then her maid was tired of wearing it because she got something else from the lady. And so she sold it to a secondhand clothing store. So then myself, as like a lower servant or a workwoman or something like that, I go into a secondhand clothing store and I purchase a gown because the fabric will be better quality, but it will be less expensive than trying to make one for myself. So don't be afraid to use slightly nicer fabrics on your clothing, even if you're doing a lower class persona. Just go with simpler cuts and simpler accessories. Oh, I was gonna go on to jewelry from there. So we have a lot of other accessories on this list. I mean, you've got your belts, leather belts. Make sure you have a buckle and not a ring on there, because that'll make a difference. There's no evidence for ring buckles, like SCA ring belts in the 14th century. There's some from like some other time periods and cultures like earlier than that, but none from the 14th century. Everything always has a buckle on it with a tongue that goes through a hole. Leather or fabric. I have woven silk belts and I have leather belts. Jewelry, depending on your class, it might be something as simple as a pewter ring. This is from Billy and Charlie's. Or it might be engraved silver. You can see that. Or it might be cast silver with a stone on it. So the engraved one I made myself. This cast one is from a company I'll link. I don't have them linked on the handout. I forgot to add them. I will update the handout and post a link in the event page. You might have, even if you're very, very wealthy, you might have gold rings. I can't afford reproduction gold rings, so I have a couple of brass rings in similar styles. We don't have a lot of evidence for necklaces. We have a few. Most of them are from Italy, and they tend to be simply beads on a silk cord go around the neck, like that. Part of my upper class stuff. You may want to consider having a paternoster that goes with your outfit. This one is for my upper class Italian persona. So it is quite long. It is made from glass beads done in the Milanese style. So they kind of look like little eyes. They're kind of cool. You might have just like a pilgrim's token that goes on, there we go, goes on your clothing. So something like this. This is also from Billy and Charlie's. I buy a lot of stuff from Billy and Charlie's. You might have a small money bag that you have coins in. This is also from Billy and Charlie's. I buy a lot from them because it's pewter and it's cheap. You can also paint pewter so that it doesn't look like it's pewter anymore. It looks like it's maybe gilt or something like that, like the paternoster beads on this. There we go, on this one. All right, leather shoes. So I have really bad plantar fasciitis and tendonitis in both of my feet, and my hip sockets don't actually line up quite correctly. So I wear a modern flat leather shoe with an orthotic in it, but it's plain black. It's very simple. It has a little bit of a pointed toe on it, and under my gowns, it's very discreet. If I know that I'm going to be walking around for a very short period of time, I will wear leather turned shoes, but if I know that I'm going to be on my feet for an extended period of time, I do have to wear a modern support in my shoe, or I'll be in a lot of pain. So if you need to go the route of a modern shoe, just try to source something that is going to look discreet underneath your garb. That is generally my recommendation for like, if you're going for like a more period look, but you know, you have to like wear real shoes. I wanted to share some images, and not just, you know, me dressed up in an outfit on camera that's like this big, on different outfits. So across here, we have different classes of men's clothing, all from around the middle of the 14th century. So on the far left, we have a gentleman in a tunic and hood and hosen. He's dressed as a farmhand. He also one of our local equestrian folks. And there was some equestrian going on at the event, so he was dressed very simply that day so that he could move easily and he didn't have to worry about his clothing being damaged. This slim tunic shape is seen on farm workers through the middle of the 14th century. They're wearing hosen, they're wearing braids, but then they wear a slim tunic shape, and then they often have a small hood on. The middle picture is a lower nobility French gentleman from probably about 1350, I believe the manuscript that is based on. So he's wearing a tunic codardy and then a codardy over it, which is kind of the transition style that you see in the 1330s to 1350s in England and France in the upper class men's clothing, and then also a matching hood over top of that. On the far right, I have a picture of my husband wearing a mid-14th century Italian zupparella. Zupparella is like a doublet or a pourpoint. It translates to the same word. It's a civilian garment that is designed to look like a military garment. This picture was taken at the end of Golden Seamstress. We'd all been awake for about 30 hours at that point. I don't have another picture of him in it for some reason. And then we go to women's clothing. Similar, on the left, we have working class, but probably more the artisan to like household servant class. I don't actually have any like actual like lower working class images of women. The dress that I'm currently wearing is in the middle picture. And then on the far right is my upper class, like lower nobility Italian, late 14th century. I pulled out all the stops on that outfit gown. So you can see how I was talking about the cleavage being from the top instead of from the front. And you can see in this picture very much what I was talking about with everything's pushed up. And so the cleavage comes from the top instead of from the front. And you can see all of these dresses, the necklines are somewhat high compared to what you might expect otherwise. I frequently get asked when people are making outfits, what color should I use? Am I limited on the color that I can use? Is this a period color? And so I have definitely borrowed this photo from this group, but they've been very like kind about like when people share the picture around, because this is a living history reenactment group from Europe. They actually do 15th century, but at the same time, like fabric dyes really didn't change between the 14th and 15th centuries. And you can see this huge range of color. It's amazing. I love this range of color that you can see here. you have everything from bright yellows on the left to grays and almost black on the right. Now, things to think about in there. The brighter, more vibrant colors are going to be more expensive to produce. So if you are buying new fabric to make yourself a garment that is for the lower class, consider buying a faded version of that shade versus the bright version of the shade. Because you don't want to, like, you could do dye remover and remove some color and like go with that, but you'll damage the fabric in the process. So it's better to just buy a fabric dyed to the color that you want, even if it's that paler color. Like, so the lighting here is kind of terrible, but the dress that I'm wearing is much lighter in person than it looks in this video. And I chose that in part because this was going to be a working class dress. And so I didn't want a vibrant blue to wear because that wouldn't be appropriate for a working class dress that I was possibly purchasing secondhand, you know, and it had been worn quite a bit already. So don't be afraid of color. Just try to avoid, you know, neons because those are chemical dyes. Kind of coming back around to, I wanted to show some comparison images after the general images. So we have the Luttrell Psalter from the early 14th century. It's one of my favorites for getting people started in the 14th century because the clothing, to produce the clothing from it is very easy. It's very straightforward, and it has all of these amazing images of people working in the fields or working in the houses, and it shows the class changes so well. So the two gentlemen here might be wearing the same tunic. I'm not sure. But they're very similar, probably because I helped them make both of them. I'm not sure. But you can see how they compare to the Luttrell Psalter images with the sort of narrower fit tunic, and it's a little bit shorter, and then they're wearing hosen and leather boots versus you know, leg wraps that you would see on a much earlier persona or something like that. And early mid 14th century, I have a lot of folks close near to me that I've helped put it into Garb that have done English early to mid 14th century. So I have the comparison to the clothing that others have made. And then we have the same French image again here. And then this Code RD that was based on a 14th century Spanish image from the, I think the middle of the century. And then Italy is a little different when it comes to its styles. And since I study Italy primarily, it's where most of my research has been. So the early part of the century, Italian fashion is very heavily influenced by Byzantine culture and fashion. Wide bands of decorative material, it's a very narrow fit to the body. But as you go through the 14th century, they get a little bit more curved because they're trading more with Western Europe, and they lose some of the wide, huge wide bands of material. You see some of narrow bands of decorative material in some images. So you've got these sort of lowered middle class images. And then the men's clothing of the middle class is often this draped garment. It's sort of a predecessor to the houppelande. It doesn't use quite as much fabric, which is really nice. Buttons down the front, you can belt it around the waist or you cannot. The gentleman in the middle is actually does not have his belted, and his actually has a slit on the side so that he can reach through to his purse. So this purse isn't on the outside where it's more likely to get stolen. Definitely need to add that to my husband's clothing. And then the image on the far left is the image that I use to base my upper class gown on. And then the image, 2 images on the right is the upper class clothing that I made for my husband. You see the wider sleeves. The little silver dots are called bezants. Mostly see evidence for them out of Germany, but with the northern Italian city-states, they were actually doing quite a bit of trade with the southern portion of Germany. And so you get a little bit of style stuff going back and forth between them as well. So we did silver bezants for his upper class clothing. And then martial garments for civilian wear. This is definitely something you see in the 14th century with these sort of idolatry of the military life that you see. That's the King Arthur legends, things like that, that living the military life, the chivalric life. So you want to be seen as especially if you're the upper class, you want to be seen as a military man, even if your military days are really past you. Because let's face it, that type of military engagement is incredibly difficult on the body. So on the left, we have an actual image from a chapel in northern Italy showing a procession of soldiers. And so you see the quilted garment that the soldier is wearing, this knight on horseback. And then the very much not a military garment of King Charles of France from 1360. He was 19 years old at his coronation, something about like that. This garment is actually quite small. It's quite heavily padded, I think in part because he was just a skinny kid. But the Lampus silk that this was produced from was so expensive that for the King of France, when they were producing it, they made sure they didn't leave any scraps of material. There's like tiny little like triangle cutouts like all over it where they just sort of patched in little pieces of fabric to make the garment fit. It's impressive. It's incredibly expensive silk. That thing never came close to armor. It is very much a civilian garment. And that being said, it is very much based on a military garment. So I've produced a number of these different garments for both military SCA combat purposes and for civilian wear, the silk thing that my husband's wearing. So the 2 on the right have actually been fought in. The fighters have been very, very happy with their performance in armor with these garments, and they're padded. They have layers of wool batting inside them to provide some cushioning against blows. And if you use wool batting that has not been processed with glues, it actually breathes and wicks water quite well and is no less warm than wearing a modern padded garment underneath. I've actually had some of the fighters tell me this breathes better than the hex pad padding that some of them wear. And then the garment on the far left was the first reproduction that I ever did of the Charles Dubois style garment. I hand sewed it and I threatened my husband with a knife if he ever wore it with armor and fought in it. So it's never been fought in either, but it probably could be. I have a bunch of resource links on here for places to get started for, developing the style that you want to see and things like that. I also have a number of websites that will walk you through patterning different garments. I have some patterning instructions for the Charles de Blois garment and for other pieces of padded armor on my website, which is Clothing the Past. And then I also have a Codardy patterning tutorial. Coat Simple also has a patterning tutorial. And if you want to do a Charles de Blois style coat and don't want to draft the pattern yourself, because my instructions are on how to draft the pattern yourself, Tasha Kelly has a good commercially available pattern. I would recommend hers over any of the others, honestly. And then there's a number of other websites here you can look at. Places to buy things. So accessories, your leather shoes, if you want to just straight up buy yourself clothing, Historic Enterprises has some of the best reproduction clothing that's commercially available, in my opinion. And then I have a couple pages, I just have the one page of some really good starter books. So if you're just getting started and you just want some like basic introductions to 14th century style, I'd recommend this list of books. I am happy to take lots of questions at this point because I talk way faster than I expected to. Holy cow, there's a lot of people on. I just stopped the screen share and I realized how many people are on.
So everybody's free to go ahead and unmute and turn on your cameras and ask your questions.
And so her response to that was, well, when you put it like that. It's like, I'm sorry, that's exactly what it is.
Really great.
Define space, check. You know, up. Yep. Your mom, check. Good.
I'm sorry, Alexis, I didn't hear what you said.
I said that was really great. It was great. Uh-oh.
Thank you.
I'm gonna go right.
Okay. And it looks like there's a bunch of chat comments. I'll be honest, I did not notice them while I was talking. Oh, how long is the piece of linen I used for my hair wrap? It is, this one's a little on the short side. 5 feet? Yeah, probably about 5 feet long, and it's about 20 inches wide. Something like that. Bicocket hats are the trucker hats of the Middle Ages. I mean, they're super popular. And you can do a lot with them. You can trim them up. You can put like pins on them. Yeah, there's all sorts of stuff. Oh, thank you for reading that book. On the cotton industry of Northern Italy. I absolutely do need to add that as a resource on here. I keep forgetting to. Someone recommended what they use for a head wrap. Oh, what type of paint do you use to paint pewter? Model paints, like literally like the little model guys, like, yeah, like the paints for that, because they're actually designed to go onto pewter. Make sure you do put a sealer on it afterwards because it'll chip off. Oh, somebody suggested enamel paints for miniatures. Sites or recommendations for Norse personas? I have none. Sorry. Cotton fabric available in the 14th century. So basically, as I was saying at the very beginning, Italy has evidence for rough spun cotton being woven with rough spun linen for lower class undergarments, but that's really the only evidence in the 14th century. So, all right, I think I got through all of the chat questions. What other questions? I can totally talk your ears off for hours. I just need to know what topic to start on.
So just about everybody's muted. Is there anybody who has a question? You want to type it into the...
Oh, okay. So trade. So trade in the 14th century is just, it's an amazing and huge, just huge topic. One of my favorite authors for that is Monroe, and he has a book called Wool, Cloth, and Gold. It was published, I think, in the late 90s, but it's still considered some of the definitive work on the English and Flemish wool trades. So beginning of the 14th century, around mid 1320s, you have the beginning of the 100 Years' War. Edward III was one of the worst economists I have ever seen, quite honestly. His tariffs on wool both being exported from the country and coming into the country make 0 sense and almost destroyed the English wool trade. I'm not kidding. It's super fascinating to read about it. It's been a while since I really dug into it, so I know I can remember like the up here information, but like the deeper dive information is a little not all of it's there in my head anymore. So, oh, I should mention on the books list, I have Medieval Garments Reconstructed Norse Clothing Patterns. That's actually the 14th century Greenland finds from 1920. That's those clothing patterns. So they're not like what we think of as Norse in the SCA. They are 14th century Norse patterns. So if you're really wanting to do like 14th century Scandinavia or something like that, great resource, amazing. But if you're wanting to do 9th century Norse, I have just 0 idea. I made myself an apron dress one time because for a friend's elevation. But yeah, so you've got a truly fantastic wool trade coming out of England and Flanders, and to the point where the Flemish woolen cloth is mentioned in a medical textbook in Italy that was being produced in northern Italy in the late 14th century. It's called the Taquinum Sanitatis. It's a Latin translation of an Arabic medical text from the 12th century and then updated for 14th century northern Italy. There are 4 or 5 existing copies of that particular translation. One of them's at the Bibliothèque Nationale in Paris. There's one in a museum in Italy and one in a museum in Austria, and then I think the 4th is privately owned. So that's, yeah, like the fact that they were producing cloth that was so well known even, you know, in northern Italy is very cool. They said something? No? Okay. And then almost all silk production at this period is coming out of Italy. Some is coming from Byzantium, some is coming from other places, but a huge bulk of the silk production in the 14th century is coming out of Spain and Italy, and by far Italy over Spain at this point. So sericulture production, or sericulture technology, which is the production of silkworms for producing silk fiber, was stolen from the Spanish in the 12th century. Actually, I think it was the Spanish Moors that they stole it from. It was brought around to the Italian peninsula, and then Lucca and Milan, Venice, all of those city-states started producing sericulture technology. Another thing that I get asked on a lot is sumptuary laws. So sumptuary laws are a lot of fun because all right, really quick, definition time. Sumptuary laws are laws that dictate what people can and cannot wear based on social class and or income. That gets really complicated really fast, especially when you have a really mobile middle class. England's attempts at sumptuary laws in the 14th century are interesting. So you have one in 1336 that prohibits the wearing of foreign cloth by anyone under the nobility. That one was mostly discarded. I was never able to find a actual reversal of it, like the 1363 law. So the 1363 law attempted to go into extreme detail on social class and who could wear what. It is really good as a reference for what type of fabrics people are buying, and not much else. So I wrote my master's thesis on the 1363 law, doing a comparison between actual fabric prices as purchased, as recorded in household books, and the fabric prices as recorded in the 1363 law. And they don't match. Even the upper classes were not buying fabrics for the prices that are listed in that sumptuary law. And it was actually revoked a year after it was put into place, because the House of Lords that had gone to the king and said, we really need these laws in order to control the lower classes, especially the merchants. They're dressing way above their station. They passed it, and then a year later, we're like, oops. Can we get rid of it, please? Yeah, that's what happened. So they can be really great references for what people perceive to be social inadequacies in the lower classes. But a lot of them weren't enforced. A lot of them were revoked shortly thereafter. France has more. France's are also kind of sporadic because Aquitaine and Occitan, and then you have Northern Normandy, and you have Brittany, and yeah, the French ones get really complicated pretty quickly, and they also were they didn't do a whole lot of actual enforcement with them. Italy has the most evidence for enforcement of any of their sumptuary laws, but their sumptuary laws tended to be more focused on either perceived morality issues or what's the word I'm looking for? Give me half a second. Oh, the circulation of gold and silver metal. So in the mid 14th century, after Edward III decided to repudiate all of his loans to one of the Florentine banking houses, there was a little trouble with the circulation of actual metal coinage in the country. So you see some laws that sort of react to that in the middle part of the 14th century in a lot of the city-states. So things like limit the number of gold or silver buttons to X number, or you can't have jewelry of beaten gold, things like that. So they're trying to limit the amount of like pure gold in people's hands so that more of it goes into currency and like hard currency, so like coins that are changing hands. The morality ones are amazing, including ones that are against young men that walk around with their braids showing. So they're wearing tunics that are so short that their braids are showing. And so then there's morality laws for that. Some of the other morality laws include women being unallowed to wear hooded cloaks in the streets unless it's really bad weather. But a lot of times those except for were added in afterwards when they realized they made a mistake. So yeah, sumptuary laws, great source for social commentary. I don't use them, I use them as a reference material, but I use them to dictate the clothing that I design when I'm producing clothing for 14th century reenactment. Somebody asked me to go back to the Luttrell Psalter. Yeah, so the Luttrell Psalter, mid-1320s, produced by Geoffrey Luttrell. He was a lower nobleman in the west of England, I believe is where his estate was. And he had a very minor connection to like a branch of the royal family. So he produced this book and is like from his wife's side of the family, and it's a bit of a stretch, but like all of that heraldry is in the book. It's one of the best examples we have for the heraldic surcoats on women, and one of the most detailed examples that we have of that type of garment on women. Similar to the Duc de Berry hours, it shows the labors of the months, and also, you know, people working fields, people working in the kitchen, people, you know, spinning fiber. It has one of the earliest depictions of a great spinning wheel, which are the really tall, like 4-foot diameter spinning wheels. Like, and then you had to like spin it by hand while you're like running the fiber with the other hand. Yeah, one of those. It has like one of the earliest depictions of one of those in the manuscript. Great source for early 14th century clothing design. It's a really fantastic manuscript. It's really beautiful too. Oh, reverse sagging. Yeah, showing their crotches. Any other questions? I can try.
I had a question. I'm working on kind of getting into the more undergarments so that I have the correct undergarments underneath my dresses. Can you talk more about the undergarments that they would have worn, or like how form-fitted or good sources for patterning, so that I can, because you see all the outer clothing obviously in pictures, it's hard to find more the underclothing. So I'm trying to get more into the period underclothing for my dresses so they fit properly.
Yeah, of course. So one of the things that I run into with the square cut, like the basic T-tunic shape that is typically used for undergarments, and that's what you tend to see images of, is that my bust is quite a bit larger than the width of my shoulders. And so all of a sudden, my shoulder seam is down here, and then it's dragging on my arm as I'm trying to move my arm around. So for my really tight, later 14th century garments, I do an inset armscye that matches my dress. And actually my chemise is my dress pattern with like 1/4 of an inch added on either side, and then just cut straight down so that it doesn't shape under the bust. And then like you can see my sleeve is actually pretty tight here on here. And then I have some others where I can't roll this sleeve up to save my life. That's as far as it goes. And then I have other chemises that are on the square cut where I can roll the sleeve up. And what I do is from the base of, back up a little bit so you can see. So from about here to here, I cut inwards at an angle so that this is the width of my shoulders and this is the circumference of my bust. Because otherwise, it's down here. I have a 42-inch bust and my shoulders are only about 8 inches wide.
Yeah, that's a problem I also have. Is
Yeah,
busty.
a
So
lot
trying
of
to get the right fit.
I just use a bigger gusset. I don't go as wide. I don't take as wide of a fabric, and I use a very large underarm gusset. I do a 6-inch square.
So that doesn't quite work for me with the way my body build is for whatever reason. It may be because I wear my boobs kind of high up too. But I mean, that's also an option that you can try. I would try out a couple of different things, figure out what works best for you. So that, because one of the things that you want to avoid is you want to avoid feeling like you're being bound up in your shoulder inside of your dress. Because this is snug, and this is my lower class dress. This is quite snug around the shoulder. And you'll actually have better range of movement if you're quite snug around your shoulder, around your arm's eye, because it won't drag up your body as much. So that's another thing, is check your overgowns that your arm's eye is fitting close to your armpit. You don't want to be so tight that you're creating a different type of binding, but tight enough that your dress doesn't move around as much when you move your arms. Somebody is saying that they do the supportive layer from the German bathhouse images. That's also totally an option. So that works better for some people. I would suggest really just play around with different methods of shape on the undergarment until you find something that works best for you. I'm lucky in that the Italian images do show evidence, the later 14th century Italian images do show evidence of an inset arm's eye, and it works well with my build. So I really like that's an option for me. But I always recommend that people find what works best for them, because you're more likely to wear the clothes if you feel like you're being bound up by them. And that's important to me. I want people to be comfortable while also achieving the silhouette.
Right.
Go ahead.
I was just, yeah, I definitely want to be comfortable in it. And so just trying to make sure everything fits properly, and then having the right layering. And so.
Yeah. Something else to consider, this sometimes feels a little counterintuitive, but if having it snug right through here in the arm will actually sometimes help to keep you a little bit cooler, because you're pressing the linen against your skin, so it's absorbing the sweat and pulling it away from your body more quickly than if you create an air pocket under there and then you've got like sweat and hot air and everything, and then you just start to feel sticky. So that's another thing to consider. Okay, yeah, so Dad, I'll send that to you in a little bit.
Now.
I'll send it to you, I promise. And then somebody asked about cosmetics and cosmetic use. So there's definitely, especially with the upper class women, there's definitely evidence for cosmetic uses. Starts with a T. There's a manuscript from the 12th century on cosmetics from Italy. I can't say it without butchering it. Yes, that Trotula. Yes, I think that is the correct one. There's evidence for it still being in use in 14th century Italy, and I have no reason to believe that it wouldn't have been in use in other parts of Europe as well to produce cosmetics. It tends to be things like face creams and maybe some lip color. I think that there's definitely perfumes for the hair to keep it clean. There is, I believe there might be like an eyeshadow, like not an eyeshadow, but like an eyelash colorant in there as well. And then white powders were definitely used to protect the complexion. Generally, okay, so I'm definitely wearing makeup right now. I'm on a camera, it's being recorded, it's going on the internet. Yes, I'm wearing modern makeup, but I'm not wearing a lot, just enough to like not look wonky on the camera. But the, yeah, so I wear like a modest amount of cosmetics. I don't always, let's face it, if I'm at Penzic and I'm gonna be sweating all day, I'm not putting makeup on as well. Put some sunscreen on, but that's gonna be it. But if I'm at an event where I'm wearing more high class clothing, I will do something to smooth out my complexion. Maybe do a little bit of mascara, eyelash filler, and I think that that's totally appropriate and within, because you have moralists talking about these women that change their, the color of their lips and things like that. You have moralist writings like decrying the use of that stuff. And so definitely women were using them. Any other questions? I think I forgot to introduce myself at the beginning of this. My name is Sarai. I live in the Middle Kingdom. I was recognized to the Order of the Laurel back in December for my research on 14th century Italian costume and culture. So yeah, that's me. And if we don't have any more questions, then we'll be done. I'll definitely update the handout to my blog as well. And yeah. So thank you very much, everybody, for coming this evening. I realize that this has basically been an hour of me just talking nonstop at 100 miles an hour. Appreciate everybody listening.